September 2016. Giulia Ballestri, 39 years old, living in a penthouse in the heart of Ravenna, had just dropped off her 3 children at school, made herself an espresso, and texted her friends about her plan to return to the family business, to rebuild her independence. Outside, the Adriatic wind was cool. Inside, autumn sunlight slipped softly across the glass walls. Then the doorbell rang. Matteo Cagnoni stood before the intercom camera, crisp white shirt, a small bouquet of roses, and a calm voice asking to talk about the old villa on the outskirts. His tone was smooth, his smile familiar, his reassurance almost tender. Giulia slipped on a light coat, her flat shoes tapping gently against the floor as she stepped out, thinking she'd only be gone for a short while. The meeting was supposed to be about paperwork, property, a quiet closure to 15 years of marriage. But hours later, inside that abandoned villa with its damp walls and air thick with dust, the sound of wood striking bone echoed violently through the dark. Days after, police found Giulia's body in the basement motionless, her skull shattered by repeated blows, blood drying on the cold concrete floor. Behind the death of a wife, a mother who smiled at her children's laughter, lay a betrayal so brutal, even seasoned investigators couldn't forget what they saw. A polished facade had collapsed, revealing a world of power, pride, and cruelty, a plan set in motion long before she ever closed the penthouse door. And this is Giulia's story. A story that grows colder the deeper you go. What began as an ordinary morning, a seemingly harmless invitation to go see the house, spiraled into a nightmare of violence. Look closely, and you'll understand why this case haunted Ravenna for years, not only as a cautionary tale about the rot beneath perfect marriages, but as a raw glimpse into the darkness, where love becomes the mask for cruelty. You're sitting there, perhaps in the comfort of your own room, holding your phone or laptop, sipping a warm cup of coffee, thinking the world outside is safe, still full of goodness. But have you ever wondered, could an ordinary conversation with the person you trust most, someone you once gave your whole life to, turn into a deadly nightmare? Could a simple invitation to a familiar place, like a house filled with family memories, become a trap, carefully planned with cold precision? Today's story is not just about the personal tragedy of one woman. It's a stark warning for all of us about the darkness that can hide within everyday life, behind charming smiles and sweet words. Because danger doesn't always wear a mask sometimes. It looks like love. If you're watching this, share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if your partner suddenly invited you somewhere private just to talk? And don't forget to subscribe, because the stories we tell here might not only intrigue you, they might just save your life. Now, let's return to the case of Giulia Ballestri, a woman whose life was swallowed by betrayal, jealousy, and unimaginable violence. Giulia Ballestri, born on the 10th of July, 1977, in Ravenna, a historic seaside city on the Adriatic coast of the Emilia-Romagna region in northern Italy, was the daughter of one of the most prominent and affluent families in the area. Her father, Giancarlo Ballestri, was a successful entrepreneur who owned a company specializing in the construction and installation of undersea pipelines, and was also a major shareholder of Mirabilandia, one of Europe's most famous amusement parks, known for its thrilling rides and Roman-themed attractions. Her mother, Maria, was a traditional homemaker, devoted to her family with boundless affection and care. Giulia grew up in a privileged environment and was educated at prestigious schools in Ravenna, where she excelled academically and developed a passion for business and travel. With her elegant appearance, long chestnut hair, deep blue eyes, a radiant smile, and a slender 1.68-meter frame, she became known locally as a symbol of grace and sophistication. After earning a degree in business administration from the University of Bologna, she returned home to join the family company, overseeing development projects in the undersea pipeline division. There, she proved herself as a sharp leader with remarkable negotiation skills. In 2002, Giulia married a man who was considered both ideal and talented, Dr. Matteo Cagnoni, a well-respected dermatologist in Ravenna. After their marriage, she decided to step away from her career to become a full-time mother, dedicating herself to raising their 3 children, a daughter born in 2004 then, 12 years old, and 2 sons born in 2008, and 2010, 8 and 6 at the time of the tragedy. Despite her domestic role, Giulia maintained an active and fulfilled lifestyle. She participated in local charity events, enjoyed jogging along the Ravenna coastline in the mornings, loved reading about Italian history, and often met her close group of upper-class friends for coffee and conversation. Her friends described her as warm, gentle, optimistic, and generous, with a passion for collecting artistic ceramics and cooking traditional Italian dishes like seafood pasta. Yet behind that seemingly perfect life, her marriage was quietly crumbling under Matteo's growing control and jealousy. The emotional strain led Giulia to make a decisive choice in 2016. She filed for divorce, hoping it would finally bring her the freedom to rebuild her life and return to her career. In the days leading up to the murder, everything seemed normal on the surface, but subtle signs of unease began to appear like the faint chill in the early autumn air of Ravenna. On the 15th of September 2016, a gray, damp Thursday morning, Giulia and Matteo went together to the local courthouse, housed in a grand historic building with marble columns and long echoing corridors, to discuss the divorce proceedings. It was a tense meeting that lasted over 2 hours, filled with heated disputes over the division of assets, including their luxurious San Rocco penthouse, the Bentley Matteo had once used to win her heart, and most notably, the ancestral villa he had inherited from his father, as well as custody of their 3 children. Giulia, her face weary yet resolute, wore a light gray business suit and had her hair neatly tied back. She spoke calmly but firmly in court, clearly expressing her wishes. She wanted primary custody of the children and a share of the assets to start a new, independent life. Matteo, on the other hand, was furious. His sharp, high-pitched voice echoed through the courtroom as he hurled vague financial accusations at her. When the tense meeting finally ended, Giulia left the courthouse feeling slightly relieved, believing that after 15 turbulent years of marriage, the ordeal was nearly over. She returned to the penthouse, where the autumn sunlight streamed gently through the large glass windows, casting golden reflections on the polished wooden floor. She tidied up her children's things, their heavy school bags, scattered Lego pieces, and freshly pressed uniforms, then sent cheerful messages to her friends on WhatsApp about her weekend plans. Perhaps a picnic along the Ravenna shoreline with the kids, or a relaxing spa day to unwind from the stress. But Matteo, her husband, was not ready to let go. He was a renowned dermatologist, often featured on local television programs as a skincare expert, and just 3 years earlier had even organized a domestic violence awareness event in Ravenna's main hall, where he gave a passionate speech about the importance of protecting women from abuse. Yet behind that perfect public image, the dazzling smile, the tailored suits, the polished reputation, Matteo was consumed by jealousy and obsession. He monitored Giulia's every move, from phone calls to friendly outings, unable to tolerate the idea of losing control. The next day, September 16, dawned like any other Friday morning, the air crisp, the streets covered in a scatter of golden leaves. After dropping her children off at the nearby elementary school, where they waved goodbye with bright smiles, Giulia returned home to a quiet apartment. Then the doorbell rang. Matteo appeared at the door unexpectedly, his tone soft yet insistent. "We need to talk about my family's old villa," he said. "It's shared property. You should take a look before we decide to sell or divide it." Giulia hesitated. Her heart beat faster as she remembered their recent arguments. She knew the Art Nouveau-style villa. He referred to an abandoned, decaying house in central Ravenna, with arched windows, stained glass domes, and a damp, moldy basement. It had been at the center of a family inheritance dispute for over 2 decades, filled with dust and fading memories. She told herself to be careful. Matteo had been increasingly irritable, his face flushing red and his voice rising at the slightest disagreement. But thinking of the children innocent and caught in the middle, She hoped that one calm conversation could finally settle things. So, against her instincts, she agreed to go. They left together in Matteo's sleek black Mercedes, while Giulia's own car remained parked outside her building, the driver's door slightly ajar, as if she'd only meant to step out for a short while. That was the last time anyone saw her alive and free. The air grew heavy that afternoon, the horizon darkening like a storm gathering silently over Ravenna, carrying with it the metallic scent of tragedy soon to unfold. Then, the tragedy struck sudden and devastating, plunging everyone around into panic and despair. On the evening of September 16, Giulia vanished without a trace, as if she had melted into the cool autumn air of Ravenna. No phone calls, no messages from the iPhone she always carried. Her friends tried reaching out through calls and social media, but only heard endless ringing or saw the dreaded notification, "Unavailable." Worry began to spread like wildfire. By Sunday, September 18, her parents and brother could no longer bear the uncertainty. They rushed to the local police station in the city center, faces gaunt, eyes swollen and red from sleepless nights. She would never abandon her children like that, Giulia's mother sobbed, voice trembling, clutching a handkerchief soaked with tears. She described her daughter's daily habits in painful detail, how Giulia was always punctual, picking up the kids, cooking dinner for the family, and calling the grandparents every evening. Her father, Giancarlo, his voice hoarse and heavy, added that Giulia was a devoted mother, who had never missed a single moment in her children's lives, not one piano recital, not one little soccer match. The police began an urgent investigation, reviewing security footage around the San Rocco district, an upscale neighborhood lined with elegant villas and ancient olive trees, where the family lived. The last known footage showed Giulia getting into Matteo's car around 10 a.m. on September 16, heading toward the city center. She looked composed, but her expression carried a faint trace of tension. Hearts pounded as investigators and family members watched the grainy video, that final glimpse of her alive. Giulia's parents tried calling Matteo again and again. His replies were evasive, his tone detached. She went somewhere. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe she needed time to think about the divorce. Each unanswered call deepened the family's dread, spreading through them like a slow, creeping infection. They couldn't eat. They couldn't sleep. At the family dining table, untouched plates of food grew cold in silence. Giulia's brother, a 2-year-old engineer, drove through the night from the windswept Adriatic coast to the narrow medieval streets of Ravenna, checking hospitals, contacting friends, even posting search notices on local social networks. But there was no trace of her. Fear swelled like a rising tide, swallowing every bit of hope. They lay awake through the long nights, haunted by dark, fleeting images. "Something terrible has happened," they whispered to each other in the dark, their hands trembling with a bone-deep chill. And thus began the ominous prelude to a nightmare, a disappearance that would soon grip the entire city of Ravenna. A city that had long known the Ballestri family was now buzzing with rumors and unease. From street cafes to local newspapers, whispers spread like smoke, casting a shadow of tension and dread over every corner of town. The Ravenna police launched their investigation swiftly, led by prosecutor Alessandro Mancini, a seasoned legal officer well known across Emilia-Romagna for handling complex and high-profile cases. On the afternoon of the 18th of September 2016, shortly after receiving the missing person report from the Ballestri family, authorities established a special investigation unit of 12 elite officers, working in coordination with forensic specialists and trained sniffer dogs. The Ravenna Police Headquarters, an old, somewhat decrepit building with endless corridors and the lingering scent of strong espresso, became the command center. Inside, investigators spread a large city map across the main table, marking potential sites in red ink as they pieced together the movements of the missing woman. Their first focus was obvious. The last person to see Giulia alive, her husband, Matteo Cagnoni. That very evening, he was urgently summoned and brought to the station in an unmarked police car to avoid media leaks. In the cold, stark interrogation room, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, Matteo appeared suspiciously calm. He sat upright on a metal chair, his once crisp white shirt now wrinkled, and stated flatly that he and Giulia had only had a minor argument about property at the old villa, after which, he claimed, she had left alone by taxi. She said she needed time to think, he repeated evenly, eyes darting away whenever a detective tried to meet his gaze. But the police immediately detected inconsistencies. Giulia's car was still parked outside her penthouse. The keys remained in the ignition. Her wallet and iPhone were found neatly placed on the dining table, unmistakable signs that she had no intention of going anywhere. Suspicion rose like an undertow. When investigators checked Matteo's phone records, they found he had made an unusually long 15-minute call to his father in Florence, right after the approximate time of Giulia's disappearance. Then came a crucial revelation. Traffic camera footage from the San Rocco district in downtown Ravenna showed Matteo's black Mercedes heading directly toward the abandoned Art Nouveau villa, the same ancestral property long entangled in family disputes at around 11 on September 16. "This is it, the key point," Prosecutor Mancini whispered to the lead investigator, his tone a mix of excitement and unease. An emergency search warrant was immediately issued. In the early hours of September 19, beneath a pitch-black sky drizzling with cold rain, a team of armed officers clad in bulletproof vests, flashlights in hand, pushed open the rotting doors of the old mansion that had stood untouched for nearly 2 decades. A wave of damp, stale air greeted them, thick with the stench of mold and decay. Some officers covered their mouths as they stepped cautiously inside. The house was eerily silent, every footstep creaking on the warped wooden floor. They moved slowly through the dark corridors, hearts pounding in the oppressive stillness. The first floor revealed nothing unusual except for a few strange scratches on the wall. But then, a young officer noticed dark stains smeared across the floor near the staircase. Blood, dried and dragged, forming streaks that led downward. Following the trail with trembling hands and tight chests, the team descended into the deep, cold basement. The beam of a flashlight cut through the blackness and landed on a corner of the room, and there, they saw it. A motionless body, curled up on the icy concrete floor. The basement was a place forgotten by time. The walls were stained and yellowed, covered in peeling plaster and patches of damp. Cobwebs hung thick across the tiny, dust-choked windows, and a crooked portrait of a Cagnoni ancestor, a stern-looking man in a 19th-century suit, hung askew on the wall, his painted eyes seeming to follow every step the officers took. A thin beam of light filtered through a high, narrow window, illuminating a cloud of dust particles swirling in the air, casting an eerie, dreamlike glow. The stench of mold mixed with dried blood made the air heavy, suffocating. When one of the officers switched on a high-intensity lamp, the sight before them froze everyone in silence. Dr. Lorenzo della Ragione, Emilia-Romagna's leading forensic pathologist, was summoned immediately to the scene. He was the first to confirm that the body had sustained multiple blows from a blunt object, and that the time of death matched the morning of September 16. In his later report, della Ragione wrote, "It was one of the most violent and heartbreaking crime scenes I have ever encountered." The forensic examination lasted more than 14 hours. Under the harsh white glare of portable floodlights, Dr. della Ragione's team worked in absolute silence. Only the clicking of cameras and the scratch of pens on notepads broke the stillness. They collected over 70 pieces of evidence, from the tiniest blood spatter on the wall, a strand of hair caught in the victim's hand, to specks of dust beneath the rotting wooden table. On the stairs leading down to the basement, investigators noticed faint barefoot prints, smeared in blood, suggesting that Giulia had tried to flee, perhaps still alive after the first blow. The technicians crouched down, using laser lights to reconstruct the movement pattern. The footprints pointed downward, and a drag trail stretched from the 5th step to the concrete floor below. It meant she had been struck upstairs, then dragged into the basement, exactly as Prosecutor Mancini had suspected. On an old wooden table nearby, They found a cloth soaked in ammonia, a cleaning agent commonly used in dermatology labs. Matteo, being a dermatologist, would have known perfectly well that it could erase blood traces. He had tried to wipe the evidence away, but under the forensic blue light, every stain glowed back at him, like a confession written in light. One veteran investigator murmured quietly, "This wasn't a crime of passion. He planned, it chose a secluded place, brought cleaning agents, and never panicked." His words hung in the cold air of the basement, chilling everyone to the bone. When the DNA results came back to the lab, there was no longer any doubt. The blood, the hair, the skin cells found on the wooden club all matched Giulia Ballestri with 100% certainty. Every drop of blood, every strand of hair, whispered the same truth. It was Giulia Ballestri, the victim of a brutal assault with a blunt object. The moment felt like a dreadful crescendo. The first officer's scream, the crackle of frantic radio calls, and a wave of horror that forced the entire team to pause and steady themselves. Suspicion surged. Police ordered Matteo's immediate detention, but he had fled hours earlier, driving to Florence with their 3 young children, a move that revealed both panic and calculation. It was a major break in the case, yet it also set off a gripping manhunt, turning the investigation into a real-life thriller full of sudden twists. As soon as authorities confirmed the body was Giulia's, the news swept through Ravenna. Italian media outlets erupted. La Repubblica, Corriere della Sera, and Il Resto del Carlino ran bold headlines. Tragedy in Ravenna. Doctor Who campaigned against violence, suspected of killing wife. On social media, the hashtag number Giustizia per Giulia appeared within hours. Thousands expressed outrage and shared photos of her smiling face alongside the message, "Non una di meno," not one woman less. The investigation widened quickly, and gruesome secrets began to peel away like layers of an onion. Tracking Matteo's movements via highway cameras and his credit card history, police discovered he had driven over 200 kilometers to Florence and was hiding at his father's home, a respected medical professor at the University of Florence, living in an old villa surrounded by lush vineyards. Matteo had brought the 3 children, a suitcase containing about 50,000 euros in cash, passports for himself and the kids, and one-way tickets to Switzerland, as though he intended to flee abroad to avoid prosecution. That same afternoon, as a downpour lashed the olive trees and the wind howled, a special operations team stormed the Florence residence. Matteo, panicking, jumped from a ground-floor window and sprinted into the nearby woods, running for 2 hours through mud, his clothes soaked, breath ragged. Officers gave chase. K9 units barked, and searchlights swept wildly across the darkness, a tense pursuit that left everyone exhausted. In the end, Matteo returned to his father's house, pale and shaking, muttering, "I'm scared. I didn't do anything." In his pockets, officers found items pointing to an escape plan, border maps, a burner phone, and even an illegal handgun. Back in Ravenna, a meticulous search of the villa where Giulia's body had been found yielded more damning evidence. A blood-stained wooden club with strands of Giulia's hair in the basement. Matteo's fingerprints all over the scene, from the stair rail to cleaning tools, proving he had tried, and failed, to scrub the place down in haste. The room was dark, reeking of damp and the metallic tang of blood, littered with old tools like hammers and saws. It wasn't a professional torture chamber, but it was more than enough to chill the investigators, especially given the at least 4 fatal blows to the victim's head. Investigators widened their inquiry to include Matteo's friends and colleagues, uncovering a disturbing pattern. In 2014, he had threatened a traffic officer during a street altercation, a glimpse of the aggression lurking beneath his polished, professional image. Then came a crucial revelation from his phone data. Matteo had hired a private investigator 6 months earlier to surveil Giulia's every move, from casual coffee outings with friends to her meetings with divorce lawyers. It was irrefutable proof of pathological jealousy and obsession with control. When finally arrested, Matteo partially confessed. "We argued fiercely, but I didn't kill her. It must have been an accident." Yet the evidence was overwhelming: DNA on the wooden club, bloodstains on his clothing, fingerprints throughout the crime scene. The truth was undeniable. Prosecutors formally charged him with first-degree murder, aggravated by cruelty and premeditation. Forensic teams returned to the villa, clad in white protective suits and illuminated by harsh artificial light. Their report was devastating. Giulia had been struck from behind with a wooden club, and evidence suggested she was still alive when dragged down the stairs. Long abrasions on her back and arms indicated she had struggled violently, breaking her nails against the cold concrete floor in a desperate attempt to escape. Her injuries were horrific. Bruises covered her face, neck, and torso. Deep lacerations from repeated blows marked her skull. The autopsy noted mild decomposition after 3 days in the damp basement, and the stench of decay filled the air, forcing some investigators to turn away in nausea. The cause of death was determined as severe cranial trauma, leading to acute cerebral hemorrhage. Giulia had likely died slowly, in excruciating pain, her heart taking hours to stop. The call that shattered the Ballestri family came at 4 a.m., when Prosecutor Mancini phoned with the grim news. On the other end, Giulia's parents broke down in anguish. Her mother, Maria, collapsed to the floor, clutching her chest, while her father, Giancarlo, whispered over and over, "No, it can't be true," as if reciting a curse. It was the tragic close of the field investigation, the confirmation of what everyone had feared. Giulia Ballestri was dead, the victim of a husband's monstrous rage. And now, the focus turned to justice, as the city of Ravenna, once tranquil and sunlit, sank into a fog of shock and grief. Based on forensic evidence, the crime scene, reconstruction, and Matteo's initial testimony, investigators pieced together the sequence of the murder cold, methodical, like a black and white film playing frame by frame. Around 11 a.m., on the 16th of September 2016, a Friday of soft autumn sunlight tinged with the cool breeze from the Adriatic, Matteo persuaded Giulia to visit the old family villa, claiming they needed to discuss property and the children's future. The two entered through the creaking main door of the long-abandoned house, a place Matteo had once dreamed of restoring into a private sanctuary, with Art Nouveau arches and an overgrown garden of wild grass. At first, everything seemed calm. They sat on an old wooden chair in the ground floor room, talking about the division of assets. But soon, the discussion turned into a heated argument. Giulia insisted on the divorce, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm tired, Matteo. I need freedom for myself, and for our children." Matteo's temper exploded. His face flushed crimson. His eyes burned with fury like a cornered animal. As Giulia tried to leave, he followed her up the stairs, shouting, "You can't walk away from me like this." He seized a wooden stick, an old support beam left in a corner, once used to prop up the decaying roof, and struck her from behind. The first blow sent Giulia collapsing to the floor, blood trickling from the fracture in her skull. "Stop, Matteo. Think of our children," she pleaded weakly. But he didn't stop. He swung again, and again, 3 more crushing blows. Blood splattered the walls, the floorboards groaned under her body, and the sound of bone cracking echoed through the hollow, silent house. It was over in seconds, brutal, senseless, and final. And in that forgotten villa, where the dust of 2 centuries hung heavy in the air, the promise of a new beginning for Giulia ended in unimaginable violence. Giulia tried to crawl a few meters, her fingernails scraping the floor, leaving long, desperate marks in the wood. But Matteo grabbed her brutally, dragging her down the stairs. Her legs struck each step, leaving deep bruises along her shins and thighs. She was likely still barely conscious, her heart beating weakly amid unbearable pain. In the dark, damp basement, he left her there bleeding, dying slowly as the pool of blood widened around her. Afterward, Matteo wiped the scene clumsily with an old cloth he found nearby, attempting to erase his fingerprints, but leaving countless traces behind. He then fabricated an alibi, calling friends and colleagues, pretending to worry. Giulia was upset with me. She's gone somewhere. I don't know where. That same afternoon, he picked up their 3 children from school, forcing a strained smile as he hugged them. Then he drove to Florence to hide. Everything happened in just a few short hours, yet every detail revealed deliberation. He had chosen an abandoned location to conceal the body, used a found weapon to avoid traceability, and acted alone, both planner and executioner of the crime, a plan born months earlier when he began spying on his wife through a private investigator. Giulia's final moments were spent in darkness, lying in a pool of her own blood, her breath slowing, perhaps thinking of her 3 children, who would soon be motherless, of the future she longed for to return to work, to reclaim her freedom from a suffocating marriage. But the next morning, September 17, she would never see the sun again. She was gone forever, swallowed by eternal darkness. The motive behind the crime was a toxic mix of pathological jealousy, need for control, and fear of losing money and social standing, a poisonous combination that turned a seemingly successful man into a killer. Matteo and Giulia had met around 2001, when the young, beautiful woman visited his dermatology clinic as a patient. Matteo pursued her obsessively, arriving in a white Bentley, taking her to lavish parties in Florence, and whispering promises of a perfect life. Back then, he was the very image of a dream husband, handsome, well-bred, his father a renowned medical professor, and ambitious. But marriage soon became a prison. His digital diary and phone messages later revealed his warped mindset. In one text to a close friend, he wrote, "She can't leave me. I won't let that happen." He followed it with vague, menacing hints about consequences. Giulia, meanwhile, was entirely innocent, a woman of grace and quiet strength, who wanted only freedom after 15 years of sacrifice. But for Matteo, her decision to leave him was an unforgivable betrayal, an attack on his ego and control. And so, beneath the mask of charm and intellect, the ideal husband and self-proclaimed activist against domestic violence revealed his darkest truth, a man enslaved by possession and rage, who destroyed what he claimed to love most. The murder of Giulia Ballestri became more than a crime, it was a national reckoning in Italy, a brutal reminder that domestic violence knows no boundaries of class, wealth, or reputation, and that even behind the most perfect smiles, monsters can hide in plain sight. After his arrest in Florence, Matteo was transferred back to the Ravenna detention center for interrogation. Criminal psychologists later described him as il narcisista ferito, the wounded narcissist. Throughout his life, Matteo had thrived on the admiration of others. Patients, students, colleagues, even the media. He had been invited onto television programs to speak about skin health and moral values in medicine. But behind that polished facade was a fragile ego, one that could shatter under the slightest blow to his pride. When Giulia demanded a divorce, it didn't just mean losing a wife. It meant losing the mirror that reflected the perfect image he had built of himself. To Matteo, Giulia was his proof of honor, the beautiful, well-born wife who validated his prestige in Ravenna's social circle. Her decision to leave was, to him, an erasure of his identity. Italian psychologists later classified the case as a textbook example of narcissistic rage, a fury born not of passion, but of wounded self-image. It wasn't explosive in a moment of madness. It was slow, deliberate, and planned. Matteo had prepared for that day, choosing a familiar location, manipulating her trust, and striking not in blind anger, but in calculated obsession for control. A commentator on RAI television later summed it up chillingly. Matteo didn't kill out of jealousy. He killed because he lost the role of the powerful husband. For him, divorce meant the death of his own identity, so he chose to kill someone else, rather than face the death of his ego. The trial of Matteo Cagnoni began in early 2018 at the Criminal Court of Ravenna, a majestic historic building in the city center, with vast wood-paneled halls and an atmosphere thick with gravity. Hundreds of journalists from across Italy gathered, turning the courtroom into the epicenter of a national media storm. Matteo was charged with premeditated first-degree murder, with aggravating circumstances of concealing the body and abuse of familial trust under the Italian Penal Code. The proceedings stretched from January to June 2018, over more than 20 tense sessions. Prosecutor Alessandro Mancini, who had led the investigation from the beginning, delivered a precise, impassioned case, methodically dismantling the image of moral integrity that Matteo had cultivated. At 52 years old, Matteo appeared in court, wearing a light gray suit, his once dark hair now entirely white. He maintained a calm demeanor, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion from more than a year in custody. He denied all charges, insisting Giulia's death was a tragic accident during an argument. He even spoke of a final kiss they allegedly shared in the villa, a pathetic attempt to romanticize the crime that enraged the public, as it contradicted every forensic finding of the savage beating. His defense team, a high-profile legal squad from Florence, hired by his father, a renowned medical professor, argued for acquittal or a reduced sentence. They claimed there was no direct eyewitness, suggesting instead that Giulia might have fallen accidentally or been attacked by a stranger. They criticized the police for rushing to conclusions to cover potential investigative errors, but the prosecution's evidence was irrefutable. Blood on the weapon matching Giulia's DNA, Matteo's fingerprints all over the scene, testimony from the private investigator he had hired to track her, call logs and security footage proving he was the last person seen with Giulia, and his flight to Florence, taking his children and passports in a clear attempt to flee. The trial captivated Italy. Major newspapers, Corriere della Sera, La Repubblica, Il Resto del Carlino dubbed it Il caso dell'ipocrisia, the case of hypocrisy. They highlighted the grotesque irony. The same man who had organized a public event against domestic violence in 2013, preaching about protecting women, had brutally murdered his own wife. It was a spectacle that shook the conscience of a nation, a story of power, pride, and possession masquerading as love. Giulia's family sat in the front row of the courtroom, their faces pale and hollow, eyes red from endless nights of grief. When Giancarlo Ballestri, her father, stood to speak, his voice trembled but carried through the silent hall. Justice must be done for our daughter, a devoted mother, a strong woman whose life was taken simply because she wanted to be free. His words echoed in the vast chamber of the Ravenna criminal court, and many in attendance wept. On the 22nd of June 2018, after 3 days of deliberation, Judge Corrado Sciaretti delivered the verdict: life imprisonment without parole for Matteo Cagnoni, and the seizure of his assets to compensate the victim's family. Matteo sat motionless. His face went blank. He bowed his head to the table, uttering only 2 words: "I'm innocent." There were no tears, no protests, just that whisper before officers led him away in handcuffs. The Court of Appeals in Bologna, in 2019, upheld the life sentence, rejecting every argument from the defense about insufficient evidence. Finally, on the 28th of January 2021, the Supreme Court of Cassation in Rome confirmed the ruling. Closing the case, after more than 4 years of trials, the judges wrote that the evidence is overwhelming and the defendant's conduct reveals deliberate cruelty. 7 brass. Giulia Ballestri will forever be remembered not for the horror of her final moments in that dark basement, but for her warm smile, her boundless love for her 3 children, and her unyielding desire for freedom after years of sacrifice. Her children, now growing up without their mother, are lovingly cared for by their grandparents. Her story stands as a powerful reminder. Domestic violence can hide anywhere, even behind the polished walls of upper-class families, among people who appear perfect. It exposes the hypocrisy of those who wear moral masks but harbor darkness within. The case also serves as a warning. The signs of control and abuse often start subtly: a partner tracking your phone, questioning your friends, controlling money, or using jealousy as an excuse for love. In Italy, organizations like Telefono Rosa and local women's shelters work tirelessly to help victims recognize the danger before it's too late. Life is precious, and perhaps Giulia's story of a woman who once dreamed of independence and happiness will save others, encouraging them to break free from toxic relationships before tragedy strikes. The murder of Giulia Ballestri was not only the tragedy of one family, it became a national symbol of femicide in Italy. Women killed by the very men who once claimed to love them, driven by jealousy, power, or wounded pride. But her case was not an isolated one. According to Istat, the Italian National Institute of Statistics, an average of 125 women are killed each year by someone they know, and more than 80% of them by a husband or former partner. Italian media began calling it il volto pulito del male, the clean face of evil. Educated men, well-spoken, without criminal records, yet poisoned by a belief that a woman is property. If she's not mine, she can't belong to anyone. After 2016, when Giulia's case dominated the news, a movement erupted, non una di meno, not one less. Hundreds of thousands of women marched through Rome, Milan, and Bologna, carrying purple banners that read, Giulia, Elisa, Chiara, non una di meno. Giulia, Elisa, Chiara, not one more. They shouted the names of victims as an act of remembrance, a sacred ritual to ensure society would not forget. The Ballestri case became a turning point in Italy's battle against gender-based violence. In 2019, Parliament strengthened the Codice Rosso, Red Code, law expediting abuse investigations, increasing penalties, and improving protection for potential victims before it's too late. Schools across the country began implementing relationship education programs, teaching young people about respect, consent, and emotional awareness topics once dismissed as private matters. And so, Giulia's name endures as both a wound and a warning, reminding Italy that true justice is not only punishment, but prevention, and that every woman's freedom must be fiercely protected. Every year in Ravenna, the people gather in Piazza del Popolo for a memorial called Per Giulia, for Giulia. Friends, colleagues, and residents bring white candles, speaking her name aloud, along with those of other women lost to domestic violence. Giulia Ballestri is no longer remembered merely as a victim. She has become a symbol of dignity, courage, and the right of every woman to be free. Her story reminds Italy, and the world, that violence doesn't always come from strangers in the dark. Sometimes it comes from the very person who once said, "I love you." Thank you for staying with me through this story. It has been heavy, tragic, filled with horror and heartbreak, but I hope it has also offered something meaningful, a reason to stay alert, aware, and compassionate in everyday life. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think truly drove Matteo jealousy, greed, or wounded pride? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next real crime story, because sometimes awareness can save lives. Until next time, take care of yourself and those you love. May your evening be peaceful, safe, and filled with light.